You're listening to Salford City FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi on 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, bringing you all the latest in the local news and the news around the area. And in today's show we have a very special guest, a guest who has played for Manchester United and had a distinguished career at few different clubs, and he's going to talk about that with us today. And he's gone into coaching now, and it'll be really interesting to see his insights into his time at United, which was a golden period, and also his thoughts on football and the way it's moved on since then. And we're very fortunate on this show to have some of the world's best athletes, sports people, footballers, coaches, and people who work in sport in a variety of different capacities. We increase the awareness and participation. That's our goal of sport in the local area, in this fantastic area which is inundated with sporting establishments. So Luke, Chadwick, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Look, so we'll sort of start with your time at United. We're not too far away from United at the radio station, and no doubt there's a lot of listeners who are big fans of Manchester United. Now, you came through the ranks there, and if I remember, the coach at the time and the coaching staff at the time held you in high regard, and you're obviously a talented midfielder. Can you tell us what it was like to be at United at that time? I mean, I can imagine you looked around the dressing room and there were star-studded players, and what was the feeling like for a youngster to be at a United team at the time that you were there?
It was incredible, really. It was like a dream come true, really, to actually be a part of it. I moved up to Manchester straight from school, from a little village in Cambridge, so it was a completely different world I was moving into, and obviously, like you say, training among the biggest stars in the world at the time. It was sort of pinch yourself time. I remember moving up, I lived in Littleton Road in Salford, on just near the training ground, like a short walk from the Cliff training ground. I used to walk in every morning, just living the dream really as a young player at the biggest club in the world.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know Littleton Road well, and that's not too far away from the Cliff training ground as well, the old training ground before moving to Carrington. And yourself, were you at Carrington at the time for training? Did that move across to Carrington at that point, Luke, or was it still at the Cliff?
When I started my first couple of years as a YTS, I was at the Cliff training ground. Then I went on loan to Belgium to a club called Royal Antwerp. I spent 7 months there, and when we come back the club had moved into Carrington, so it was over there. It was a completely different setup to the Cliff with incredible facilities. At the time I think it was sort of groundbreaking that a lot of the big clubs have got it now, but at the time the facilities at Carrington and still are incredible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing that struck me, Luke, I mean, I sort of have a couple of friends and colleagues who've worked and work at United, and I visited Carrington at that point when it was sort of just established and it was like the state-of-the-art facilities. But one thing that struck me about Carrington was the atmosphere there, and just generally speaking, there was a buzz about the place at the time, and the up-and-coming players too. I felt a sense that they were influenced by what was going on at the top, and it was just a really polite place to be, a really respectful environment. And it was something that sort of occurred to me. I sort of looked around and thought, these players, some of them are like, huge stars, and some are going to go on to be big stars, but they're really, really down to earth. Luke, was that a feeling that you had as well, sort of coming through the ranks, or is that just maybe my perception at that point, sort of visiting and catching up with people?
I think at a club with Sir Alex Ferguson in charge, it was always the human qualities of the people around it just as much as the footballing ability. So I think all the players that come through at the club are always brought up on treating each other correctly and treating their career with respect and making sure they do everything they can to stay in the game. There's no chance of anyone ever getting big time or anything like that around while Sir Alex was in charge, because it was all about what you were as a person just as much as what you were as a player.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's one thing that I sort of sensed at that point there, sort of visiting and thinking, these guys are huge superstars, and there's so much talent here, and just that sort of humbleness and down to earth sort of environment. I think that sort of goes a long way to helping players and performers do well. Obviously, there's a lot of competition for places there. It's not easy to break through the first team. One would have thought at the point that you were there was obviously a lot of players with exceptional ability in the first team and even outside the first team. But for yourself, Luke, what was it like to try and break into that first team? Did you, I know that your goal was to sort of break through and consolidate in the first team, but what was it like day to day just trying to get a foothold and get into that first team setup?
Well, obviously it was a huge challenge to even get into a squad with that much ability in it. When I moved up to Manchester, I didn't really think I'd have that much chance of getting in the first team because it was such a big club. But then you get up there and you realise you're around it, like you say, the environment where everyone's treated the same, and you feel a bit closer to it. So to even have got in and got the few games that I did at United was a massive achievement for me. I think it was always going to be tough to get in the team on a regular basis in front of the likes of David Beckham and Ryan Giggs, two of the best players that have ever played the game at United. So it was always a challenge, and as time goes on and you get a little bit older and all you really want to do is play football, you start to realise it might be in your best interest to go to another club and play football.
Yeah, at the time, the United had players go out to Belgium, and yourself, you went out to Belgium yourself. And how would you describe your time in Belgium, Luke? Was that a time that sort of helped you develop as well, or playing in a different country, different style of football? Belgium's obviously produced a lot of top youngsters themselves in their own right. What was your experience like in Belgium?
That was incredible. I absolutely loved every second of going out there. Just to like you say, experience a different way of life, live in a different country. It just felt like it was so free out there because no one really, even in the team talks and that, the manager didn't speak English that well, so it was more a case of just going and playing and being free. It was a real time that I enjoyed, and obviously learnt a lot on the football pitch, as well as being out in a country as an 18, 19-year-old boy, of learning about yourself and living in a different country. It was an amazing life experience, both in football and in general things as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and after your time in Belgium, you'd go on loan, if I recall, was Burnley and Reading. So your time at Burnley is a club that is not too far away from here as well, and I'm a big fan of the way the club is run and the people at the club as well, and they've been doing it year in, year out for a long time now. And how would you describe your time at Burnley, Luke, in terms of playing and the setup there? My experience, it seems like a really friendly sort of family type club, and they punch above their weight. That's not being disrespectful. Obviously, they've had some great history and tradition, but equally they run the club really well, and they do exceptionally well year in, year out. But how would you describe your time at Burnley, Luke?
Well, it was a thoroughly enjoyable season for me at Burnley. I think when I went there, my time, as well as when I went to Reading, my time at United was more or less over. I don't think there was much chance of me getting back into the first team squad there when I went on these loans. But Dan Turnant was in charge at the time when I went, and he was an incredible character, and I really loved the season playing under him. And it was a really good dressing room, a great bunch of lads. It was a lot different to Man United, but at the same time it was a fantastic family club, and I really enjoyed my time there. The club was struggling at the time. We were in the Championship, and it was a little bit of a relegation dogfight towards the end, but we managed to get out of it. And having been at the club for that season, it's so great because of the great people involved there to see how brilliantly they're doing now in a real established Premier League club.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's a fantastic club, and I think that they certainly, it's a certainly tough place to go and play. Burnley, absolutely, they run the club really well from what I can see from the outside looking in, and it sort of then got a move. Was it a permanent move you got at West Ham, Luke, or was it? If I recall, you'd moved across to West Ham. Did they sort of sign you, or from the Lions goal?
That was a time when I think I'd realised my time at United was coming to an end. I wanted to try and get back. We just had a baby. My first child had just been born up in Manchester. All our family were back down south in Cambridge, so we were trying to find somewhere a bit closer to home. And then the opportunity to come to West Ham. Alan Pardew was the manager at the time. He was the one that took me to Reading on loan. It was nice to link back up with him, and to sign for a club of West Ham size and stature was obviously a good move for me as well.
Absolutely, West Ham is really traditionally they're a big club, and there's no doubt about that. West Ham, and they've always played an exciting brand of football too. And how did you adapt to West Ham? I mean, obviously, being at United and being on loan, and then West Ham. I mean, under Pardew, did you, in terms of the system and the style of football, Luke, how did you find that you adapted to that? Was it something you had to sort of take time to adapt to? Did you sort of pretty much walk in there and felt at home at the place?
I think at the time it was quite easy to adapt to West Ham. They was obviously a championship club at the time and had a lot of really good players, obviously not of the calibre that was at Manchester United, but it was a really talented group that sort of huffed and puffed throughout the season but managed to get promotion to the Premier League in the playoffs in the end of it. So it was a rewarding season, possibly didn't perform to the best of my ability at times, but it was an enjoyable season at a club, and I was living back home with a young family, so it was nice to spend a lot of time with them as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is it, say, I guess our listeners will probably be wondering, people who are listening in and they sort of watch football from a perspective of from a fan's point of view, in terms of for a player, Luke, leading a club like United, obviously yourself, you're in the periphery, and a lot of good things were said about United, and obviously like you mentioned before, the likes of Beckham and Giggs and staff that the team was never going to be easy to break through, but equally having sort of been on that periphery and sort of playing a number of first team appearances, is it hard afterwards to think, okay, I've got to put that behind me now and move on? I mean, you sort of seem to have been able to do that. Is that sort of something that's difficult for a player at a club like a United or a huge club, one of the biggest clubs in the world, and you have to move forward and adapt in a different environment? Is that something that you sort of you struggle with, or did you sort of pretty much get on with it and put it to bed? I'm going to move on and move forward.
I think being at Manchester United at any age helps you loads if you ever go to different clubs, because the standards are so high that it stands you in great good stead to take that on to the rest of your career. I think an issue for me at United was having a few injury problems and having to change the way I played to a certain extent. When my game was really built around being real fast when I'm travelling with the ball and that sort of thing. After a couple of operations as a younger player, that sort of went away from me a bit. So I think it took a long time after I left United, or when I was on loan towards the end of my time at United, to sort of change the way I played from someone who could run past the fullback really quickly to finding different ways to do that. I'd say any player being at United that has a career in football, it helps loads, because the standards at that time were so high that even if you didn't go on to another walk of life that wasn't being a footballer, it's still that work ethic that's drummed into you from such a young age at Manchester United helps you loads.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really interesting. And from the point of view, like the fans listening that are interested in obviously the outside the game and the point that you've made, there was a really interesting one like injury and they're sort of things that generally we're not really, from a fan's point of view, we are aware of, but not entirely aware of how it affects the player and the style of football and the way they play, and a niggle here, and obviously players pick up injuries and have to change the way they play. And like yourself, you had abundance of pace, and your game, I'm not suggesting it was just built on speed, but equally, if that's a big part of your game, and then for injury you've got to change and adapt. It's not always easy. So from the outside looking in, sometimes from a fan perspective, it's like, well, the players change the way they've played, and I think that's sort of an eye-opener for people who looking from the outside in. Sometimes it's not just about the move, it's also different styles of football that a team plays. It takes a bit of time to adapt as well too. But certainly the ethic that you mentioned there, in my experience, Luke, of players who've played for United, I've been quite fortunate. I've worked with some players who've played there in various capacities, and the likes of Barry, Chris, who was manager there, who I worked with very closely for a number of years, and he brought a lot of that sort of ethic there. It was incredible. The attention to the detail that he brought, Chris Casper, to Barry, was phenomenal in the youth team and in the first team. Just really, really fine margins to detail, and it was an eye-opener for me to see someone who sort of worked at that sort of level, bring all these sort of qualities that can make a huge difference as well. Before we sort of talk about yourself and getting into coaching, you'd sort of then gone to Stoke, and Stoke traditionally is a tough team to play. They've always been a tough team to play, the style of football. And how did you find Stoke, Luke? What was that like for you to go to Stoke?
Yeah, I signed for Stoke on loan to begin with, and they had a Belgian manager who actually knew me from my time on loan in Antwerp, and it was, again, Stoke, it's a big club with real passionate fans. It's a real tough place to go as an away player, and a real good place to play if you've actually played for the club. It was a tough time in the fact that I moved up there, and my wife had just had our second child, and I moved up there and sort of played on my own without them up there for a while. Then they moved up and didn't really settle. So off the pitch it was sort of a bit of a tough time, but on the pitch, again, I can't complain and really enjoyed my time at Stoke. And then Tony Pulis come in, who was a wonderful man and a brilliant manager. It was great to have worked with him at some point in my career, so I did thoroughly enjoy that as well.
Definitely, and you then moved on. Was it Norwich that you sort of, I stand corrected now, sort of going off memory yourself, that you sort of had a stint at Norwich too? Luke, was that?
Yeah, so again, it was a bit of I went to Norwich to get back home again to live in Cambridge with my children. I had to play my first game against Ipswich in the East Anglian Derby, managed to score a goal, and then towards the end of the game got a bad injury and was out for about 7-8 months from the second I signed. So after a great start, it turned into a bit of a tough time, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, definitely. Just out of interest, and the listeners will probably be interested to sort of hear, and how from a playing perspective, and one thing that we sort of don't hear about is when players do get injured, and it must be a difficult time for a player who wants to play football, wants to get out there when you've got an injury. How tough is it for a player when you're injured and you can't get back out on the field? I mean, sometimes I think there's a misconception that certain players, and it's they pick up an injury, but I think for me, in my experience, there's nothing worse for a player picking up an injury and just the circumstances being out of their control, not being able to get back on the pitch. And did the different players deal with it differently, Luke, or yourself? Did you have a way of managing things in terms of keeping your mind off things and sort of getting back on the pitch again?
Yeah, obviously it's the worst thing in the world to love playing football, whatever level you're playing at, and because of something physically hurting yourself, you can't do it. So it was always a horrible time. Obviously I suffered from a few throughout my career. So I think part of it is learning to deal with it. I think every long injury I've had, although it was a nightmare at the time, when I look back now, it certainly makes you a stronger person and time to really reflect and learn about yourself, both in a footballing sense and personally as well. So despite all the injuries I've had, I don't really regret having them, because I think it has sort of helped make me the person I am today.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really philosophical way of looking at things. Sometimes things happen and not ideal at a time, but you grow into a different person and develop, and that's a really important thing. And you went across to Milton Keynes. That was an interesting move in terms of Milton Keynes at the point from the outside looking in. They were building the club, and the club obviously had aspirations. And I've actually been to the stadium, and it's a fantastic place to play football. Really good experience. And how would you describe your time at Milton Keynes in general?
I absolutely loved it. It was probably the time where I spent the longest time on the pitch without suffering really as much from injuries. It all just felt so brand new. Like you say, the stadium was incredible for a League One club at the time. The chairman was a wonderful man. I got to work under some great managers in Roberto Di Matteo. Paul Ince, who's a player that I used to love when I used to watch United as a kid. He was one of my favourite players. And Carl Robinson as well. He was a great man and really enjoyed work under him. So it's probably the most stable part of my career. Again, it was real close to home. I was just settled, and it was a real nice time for me playing at Milton Keynes. I think it was a good 5.5 years that I spent there, and probably my happiest in my football career.
That's interesting, Luke. And did you ever feel like, say, at United, sort of going back to United, do you ever feel like, say, a sense of pressure to, obviously you're playing and you're not so much focusing on what's going on and what's being said on the outside, but a player like yourself who's sort of, being tipped to sort of go on, and the manager said a lot of positive things about you, at least, when I sort of have watched the games on TV, but equally in football circles, obviously a lot of people hold you in high regard. Did you ever feel a sense of pressure at any point to sort of, obviously you look at the United lineup and the team sheet and think, well, where am I going to fit into this sort of lineup? But did you ever feel a sense of pressure to sort of keep that standard up and to maybe kick on, or was that one of the things maybe at Milton Keynes that was quite helpful, where you could just play football and just enjoy the game?
I think there's always pressure. Like, obviously the pressure's bigger the bigger club you're at. Man United was the biggest club in the world, but I don't think that's the beauty of being young. I think in youth, where that's probably not the thing that's on your mind at the time. All that's on your mind is playing football. I think the pressure probably gets a little bit as you get older and you've got a family and you're not playing in the Premier League. You've got the pressure's paying your bills at the end of the month and that sort of thing. So I think maybe the beauty of youth is, when I was at Man United, it weren't really, obviously there was pressure, but you probably feel it more the older you get, and you're sort of fighting and striving for the next contract and that sort of thing. So
absolutely, that's a great point. No, for sure. And because I just felt that when you make the move to West Ham, and for example, and whether you go to Burnley on loan, and the United player comes along, and there's sort of expectation in the air really, and what's this play all about? And did you ever feel that way, where sort of when you sort of after you move on from United, it's like you carry that sort of tag with you in terms of wherever you go, and there's almost an expectation of what can this guy do type thing, or like you says, youth is one of the things we just focus on the game. Did you ever feel that, where having that sort of experience of being at United, that was going to be part of the judgment that the fans, the staff made, or?
No, I don't think I can see where you're coming from. I don't think I ever really felt that. Obviously, whenever, because I played for Man United, it was always something that my teammates or staff, etc. at the club that I went to would want to talk about, because obviously I was in one of the best squads that United have had in years, so it was obviously an honour to be there. I feel like I didn't really feel any extra expectation or anything like that, but it was certainly something that people wanted to talk about, the fact that stories about Manchester United and being involved in it there.
Absolutely, and that's an interesting point, and it's interesting to hear from your perspective, and because as obviously you having been there and done that, it's interesting to hear what your perspective was, and certainly from the point where a player in a certain club will sign a player, whether it be on loan from a Premiership player, whether it's United or any other team, there's a little bit of expectation in terms of all eyes on this player type thing, but it's fascinating to hear your your perspective and point of view of obviously how you handle that, and there's no better way of handling it than just playing and getting on there. But definitely, I think from the outside looking in, there's a fascination with what went on at United at that point. Obviously, producing players, incredible production line of players over a number of years, which was really fascinating from a coaching point of view. Obviously, the fans as well. You sort of then turn your attention to coaching. So from the coaching point of view, you've had this experience of playing at different levels abroad, obviously United. How much of that, Luke, have you taken into your coaching roles at the moment? Obviously, the experience you've had, there's probably no better or bigger club to have played for like United, but equally, going straight from United to a coaching role is one thing, but I think experiencing different levels of the game too gives you that extra edge really to understand and have more of an awareness of the way things work at various levels too. How much of that has influenced you as a coach, Luke?
I think I've been hugely fortunate to play under some incredible managers and coaches throughout my career. So obviously the little things that they've done have stuck, and sort of try and take that into my own coaching. All my coaching is done with sort of young players and children, so it's not exactly the same as that, but it's the small little details of trying to make these kids fall in love with football, just how the coaches at Manchester United done that with me as such a young player. So it's trying to take them and use them standards that we had at Manchester United when I was in the youth team or academy, what it was called back then. It's trying to move that on and help with the young players that I work with today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I think sometimes what can happen if you've got a player who's played at the highest level and goes straight into coaching without experiencing football at different levels, like, be it League 2 and League 1, sometimes the expectations of the players can be that everyone performs at that level type thing. And obviously there's going to be a gap in terms of the players that were coming through United. So, with the exception of obviously different individual players, I know that the level in general at United is going to be higher. At least that's my impression at sort of that youth level. But do you find that you can sort of, when you mentioned there a really good point, we're getting the players to sort of fall in love with the game and enjoy the game. When you sort of coach, do you sort of keep that in mind? Do you have that at the forefront of a session plan where you're thinking, okay, I want to make sure these guys enjoy the game? It's not just about being a pro player. It's also about enjoying the game and just getting out there and being able to immerse yourself in why you started playing the game in the first place. Is that one thing that you do yourself, Luke, as a coach?
Yeah, and I think that for every session, every game, the main point for me is for the players to enjoy it and get that out of it, because like the odds to become a footballer, the odds are so heavily stacked against kids to get through now, with 1% making it through the professional player. So it's about we try and make it more about the actual experience rather than the end goal, because whatever happens, whenever they stop playing at an elite level, we want them to have had a real positive experience in it. And it's not just about being a footballer. At the end of the day, it's about the process of what you can take out of it, and that's both footballing and human qualities that we can really help the children as coaches.
Absolutely, and that's a really important message. And then the young people listening, like people of any age, parents with kids who play the game or any sport, not just football, that's a really important message for them to sort of take, that coming from someone who's sort of been there, done that, who knows how hard it is to break through, that enjoy the game and just be the best person you can be and take that skill wherever you go is a really important take-home message. I mean, one of those questions I ask the people I interview, particularly in football, is players you've played against. Is there any one player you can think of, Luke, that was tough to play against, that sort of stands out, or just collectively over a number of years, different players were difficult to play against in different ways? Or what are your thoughts on that? Is anyone you sort of played against and thought they were probably one of
the best player, the most difficult players I've played against would have been in training.
Exactly.
United, obviously, the likes of Roy Keane. I remember having to play against Mikel Silvestre a bit, because I was wide right and he was left back, and he was such an incredibly hard player to get past when you're running with a ball. So I'd say it was mostly the Man United squad in training that are far and away the toughest players that I played against.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the great things, and I'm glad you made that point, because sometimes, you know, certain players will be at a team and then they might not be breaking through in the first team, and I'll think, well, I'll get a move. And it's not for me to comment on what people do. They have to do what's right for them. But equally, to be in an environment where you've got big players around you is priceless, obviously, for your development. And just sort of hearing you say that, you know, day in, day out, being around players like that is only going to make you a better player. So, you know, hanging in there, I think is a big thing, where, like you said, if you're sort of having to train for the likes of Silvestri and the players you had around you then, it can only be a good thing in terms of development. In terms of moving forward, where do you see yourself sort of going from here? I mean, you sort of got into coaching now. You're at Cambridge. You sort of, you know, you sort of had. You have a stint at Cambridge as a player as well, Luke. You sort of Did you have a stint as a player at Cambridge as well, or straight into coaching?
Yeah, so when I was a little boy, my first club I ever went to watch and support was Cambridge United. They're the club I sort of loved, and my dad used to take me to the games at 4 or 5. I've never since then I followed them. So when I was coming to the end at Milton Keynes and the old legs weren't feeling as good, my one dream I had was to play for Cambridge United. So I sort of approached them and had sort of 12 months playing for them. At the time we got promoted back to the Football League, played Manchester United in the FA Cup, so it was like an incredible...
Of course, I remember that, yeah. Wow, what an experience that was. And how was that experience? I actually watched that on TV. I recall that. What was that like to play against United after all those years? How would you describe that experience? That would have been incredible.
I was amazing. I couldn't believe it when I was watching the cup draw with me, missus and 2 kids, and when it came out that we got Man United at the Abbey at home, we couldn't believe it. We were screaming the place down. And then to actually get the draw at the Abbey, to go back up to Old Trafford, and that was the first time I ever played there since as a player. It was incredible to go back and got a really good reception from the fans, which obviously I weren't expecting. It had been so long. It was a lovely evening for me, and it ended up being the last game I ever started as a professional footballer, so it weren't a bad way.
What a way to, fantastic. I mean, there are fairy tale endings in sport, and that certainly is. And so going forward from here, obviously you're in coaching now, and moving forward, is that something you're going to focus on, the coaching side of the game now, and just see where that takes you, or?
Yeah, well, I've never really been interested in being a first team manager or anything like that. I've done some work obviously at Cambridge within the academy. We've just set up with a couple of other coaches a company called the Football Fun Factory, which is all about engagement with children and really raising participation levels in sort of local areas. So we're just starting on that journey, which has been really interesting. That, like I spoke about before, that's all about just making football fun. There's no real, it's for kids of all levels, boys and girls, any ability. So it's just trying to make football fun, and their first experience of football hopefully be something that they'll take on with them for the rest of their lives.
Fantastic. No, that's really fantastic, and I'm sure they'll appreciate having someone like yourself involved in the program, who sort of played at one of the greatest clubs in the world in one of the greatest periods for the club. That's for sure. That's fantastic. For any young player to have that opportunity. Absolutely. It's been fantastic having you on the show, Luke. It's been really fascinating. I'm sure the listeners have really enjoyed the show, and I think our listeners, they're very knowledgeable about the game, and we over here we have so many sporting institutions and establishments, and obviously the likes of Salford now in football are on the rise as well, and we'll see where that goes, which is great buzz about the town too. But it's been great for you to come on board the show. Look, I really appreciate it, and I wish you all the best for your coaching and the project you're involved in at the moment.
Thank you, Jimmy. Nice speaking.
So you're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi on the Friday Sports Show, and we're very privileged to have some fantastic guests on the show, world-class athletes, footballers, coaches, trainers, people who just participate with the vision of increasing awareness and participation in the area, but also we bring insights into the world of sport from around the world. And today we have a guest who is a long, long way away from Salford, but equally, no doubt she's had an impact across the globe for her work. And when you look at sport, for me, growing up, there's no substitute for speed. Whether you're watching rugby league and you see a winger flying down, or rugby union with the World Cup, and we've seen pace. There's no substitute for it. Football, it's incredible when you see someone on the ball. And today we've got someone who specialises in that area. I don't know if there's a great deal she can do for me at my stage of my career, but I'm sure I can put an extra half a yard on of pace. But we welcome Ranell Hobson to the show. She's the training director of the Academy of Speed in Sport Australia. So Ranell, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on board.
Thank you, Jimmy, so much for having me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so you specialise in speed. I suppose the place to begin is, how did you get involved? How did you sort of get into doing what you do? It's something quite unique in one sense. I mean, obviously these days we have speed coaches, but equally it's sort of something a little bit unique, but I see the value in it. How did you get into it yourself, Ranell?
I've actually been a sprinter all of my life. I did a degree in sports science and coaching as my undergrad, and I did a master's in high performance sport. And it's really quite interesting, but one day I was just watching kids playing sport at kind of like a Metro League kind of level, and I thought, wow, these kids can't run. Yeah. And knowing the physics and the biomechanics of running, having studied it all my life, and being an educator at a college, I was the head of sport and fitness for a college at that time, so I was doing a lot of lecturing and presentations. I thought I really need to move back into the field of coaching and really help these kids move to the next level. And I've been doing that now for 10 years, and now I'm working with semi-professional, professional, and still down at the recreational level, because I like to help anyone that wants to move to that next step, maybe achieve a position in a state team or move through to a national squad. So we work with a lot of kids and a lot of semi-professional and professional athletes on just really working on their technique and their explosive speed for sport.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and our listeners are probably wondering when you mention sort of technique for running. And I must admit, many, many years ago, when I was a teenager, I found a coach who would help me with my running technique, and it really gave me an extra yard and a half in speed, and just by adjusting my arm movements and my knee action. And I just felt the economy as well of movement when I would play football. That was the biggest thing for me. It wasn't so much the extra pace, when it was more the energy that I wasn't expanding that I was before. But when you say technique, is there a specific technique you think that works best, or do you sort of improvise with what the person has? What's your take on technique?
Well, the thing is that really sprinting in its beauty is all physics and biomechanics. So you've got to get the foot down on the field or on the court or on the track in the correct direction and with magnitude of force to drive the athlete forward. So technique is critical in actually getting the athletes to the point where they want to be. And you're exactly 100% correct in talking about efficiency and economy of running. I mean, I even work with endurance-based athletes and trail runners just on getting their technique right to improve those things. So when you're looking at foot strike, foot recovery and stride cycle, getting those technique rights in terms of the positions and the angles of the skeleton driving down into the ground, you're improving the efficiency of the athlete through their biomechanics, and that in turn improves their economy. So it allows you to run with less oxygen utilization and less energy being used by the body, so the athlete can get to the final siren with more fuel in the tank because their mechanics have improved. So it's free energy when you learn how to run really well. Not only does it give you that explosive speed, but it gives you, as you said, more energy, and you become more economical as a runner.
That's really fascinating. And for me, Ranell, there's nothing more beautiful than seeing an athlete in full flight when you're sort of sitting there watching, even more more so live sport, when you're sort of there in the thick of the action, you see someone sort of, whether it's rugby and just sort of, make a break and flying downfield, or even in, say, the showpiece of the Olympics, in my opinion, a lot of people is probably the 100 metres, and you sort of see them just flying out there. There's just a poetry in motion for me. It's fascinating. But yourself, who doesn't need a bit of extra speed in terms of running ability? Do you specialise in these sports specifically, or do you sort of focus on one area? I'm sort of aware you work with people across a different range of sports. What are some of the sports that you work with, Ranell?
Yeah, a lot of different sports. As you said, the bizarre thing is that track sprinters learn how to run and run really well. But for so long, field and court-based athletes didn't learn how to run. And so they were really at a disadvantage. So we work with athletes from so many different sports. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of work with New South Wales Baseball. I'm the strength and conditioning coach and speed coach for GWS Fury Premier League Netball here in Australia. I work with a lot of soccer players, so football players for you guys in the UK. That's a huge percentage of my business, primarily too because the footballers tend to not be able to get up out of their hips when they need to get some explosive speed on, so there's a lot of mechanical issues there with the pelvis, with the hip flexors being too short and the hip extensors being too weak, so we work on a lot of soccer players to fix that. I work across rugby league, rugby union, AFL, there's so many different sports, and then I have my small group of track sprinters that I still work with as well.
Yeah, it's amazing how you work across a broad range of areas, and I think you've made a really good point there about certainly in team sports, and in my experience certainly in football and working in performance in those areas over the years, one of the big areas for me is technique and economy of movement, but also just enhancing what they have. And for years, Ranell, there was sort of this misconception that you sort of get out there and run, but these days every millimetre counts. It's incredible how the margins are incredible. And sort of just to take you back, Ranell, for the listeners to sort of gauge and get an idea, when I mentioned it's a game of inches, there was a Rugby League World Cup, the last Rugby League World Cup, England were playing Australia in the, I think it was the final, and it was an ankle tap away from getting away from the other player and scoring a try. And this is like a margin, that sort of burst of speed. He lunges and just taps him on the ankle, and he falls over and doesn't score the try. You think, well, we're talking like fine margins across different sports, and I think that sometimes the improvements, even minimal margins, are incredible. But people who come to you, what sort of are their expectations in terms of speed? Do you get people coming along? Are the expectations realistic in terms of speed? What are some of the improvements that you've seen from people who've come to see you? What sort of?
Yeah. I think that we always talk about all of our field and court-based sports being, those big plays, just a matter of inches, whether or not you can get away from your opposition to take possession of the ball or contest a pass. And the thing is that so many people come to me and they think that they're just going to get those little 1% marginal improvements, and they end up getting so much more than that. And one of the reasons being is that when it comes to speed and really developing an athlete for explosive speed, it's not just about the running, it's not just about the technique, but it's about elastic potential, it's about the stiffness of the feet and ensuring that the athlete doesn't have any slack, which means that they've got good postural integrity, so a lot of strength work needs to occur. It's about range of motion around the pelvic structure and the ankle complex. So sometimes when the athletes come, I'll do a full assessment on them, and we can give them so much speed within a few weeks, just because we're aligning the skeleton correctly and giving the joints the freedom of movement that they need to be elastic and to apply force to the ground, because they've already got the strength, but we have these power blockages primarily at the pelvis and at the calf complex that's stopping that athlete from getting that force into the ground and driving them forward explosively. So you look at the running, you look at the mechanics of running, but you also have to look at the skeletal structures, joint structures, their range of motion, and the elastic potential of those muscles around those joints to free up the athlete to be fast. So we end up, sometimes times athletes will come back to me and they'll say, I can't believe how much faster I am. And I think, okay, well, all I've done is fix the foot. So we're going to keep travelling up the body and we'll keep getting faster.
That's really interesting, and I want to sort of find out a little bit more about sort of what you do. And what I find interesting, it sort of takes me back to what I mentioned earlier, years ago when I hired a coach to help me with my speed. This is sort of going back a long time. The methods probably weren't like they are now, but equally, in a very short space of time, I went from being sort of mediocre to being pretty quick, and people sort of ask questions. They thought, well, how do you get so fast, so quick? I mean, I hired someone about, say, 18, 19 years of age, and in about 3 or 4 months I was just sort of blowing people away. And I'd play sport at a high level. I'd play football, soccer football. I'd also play rugby, touch rugby for work, and I'd just sort of sit on the wing and sort of blow people away with speed until I caught the eye of athletic coaches, and people were saying, how'd you get so fast? And I just uncovered something that I didn't even know was there myself, and I sort of told myself, for years I had slow switch fibers. I was convinced that there was no chance for me, and then until I sort of did that, and I wasn't a world beater, but I was running pretty damn quick, to be fair. But the point being is, what are some things that you do to improve speed? And what's your take on, obviously, the genes and the fibers, but what are some things that you do? I mean, the things that I sort of did at that point was just plyometric weight training and stuff. But we didn't really have things like the ladder work and stuff that you've got now, the reaction stuff that around these days. Well, there's some pretty interesting things, but what are some things that you do? Obviously, each case is individualized, but as a general overview, what are some things that you do, Ranell?
Yeah, I actually don't use ladders at all, believe it or not. That's foot patterning work, which is very different to developing explosive speed in athletes. So I really have a philosophy, and that is that you have to lift, you have to jump, and you have to sprint to get faster. So you have to be strong so that you can apply force to the ground really well. You have to jump because you need the stiffness and the elastic potential, so that's all your plyometric work, and you need to sprint, and you need to sprint at really fast velocities. So one of the things that you find with team-based, like field-based athletes, is that when they're doing their sprint training in a team setting, they don't give 100% intent in those, and so they don't actually challenge the nervous system to work as hard as it possibly can in terms of turnover and cadence of stride. Yeah. So we work on so many different things. We work on mindset and really teaching the central nervous system to be explosive in intent. We work on strength capacities and primarily speed strength, so moving your body, having a really good power to weight ratio and being able to move that quickly. We do a lot of plyometric training, so a lot of jumps, hops, leaps and bounds, and we sprint.
That's really fascinating that you say, and for me, I felt there was a time in team sport that there was a huge overuse of ladder work, and it was a sort of buzzword, and I can appreciate certain sports require lateral movement, but I felt that was just for the sake of doing it. It's like the buzz thing at the time, and when eventually I would train for another coach who was a conditioning expert in the UK. He was the conditioning coach of Wigan Rugby League at the time. He didn't use any ladders, nothing like that. There was a lot of running up and down sort of stairs and hills and that sort of stuff. But the point being is that for me, lateral movement is obviously important in football, in soccer, football and other sports, but I think one of the issues I found going back a few years ago, there's so much focus, Ranell, on lateral movement. People are forgetting that if you can't run straight, then your lateral movement is going to suffer as well in terms of, like the things that you mentioned then, the system of speed. And do you sort of do anything across, do you do any sort of work on lateral movement too, or do you sort of...
Yeah, absolutely. The lateral movements and lateral running, side shuffling, backpedaling, all of those sorts of movements are really, really important to sports performance. But what you find is that they're normally done at a submaximal level. So, for example, we talk about rolling into sprints. So a footballer should never be standing still, for example. So they'll be moving submaximally, they'll see something occur in the game, they'll put on a faster run, and then they'll move into an explosive sprint to either, take a shot at goal or whatever it might be, or to break away from their opponent. So usually what happens is that when they're doing the side shuffles, when they're backpedaling, that's when they're really viewing and observing the game. So they're not in possession of the ball at that point in time. And then usually what will happen is that they'll see something happen in the game, they'll put on a surge. That's when they need to be really explosive, break away from their opponent, and then they get involved and they actually make contact with the ball. But all of that change of direction and lateral work that we talk about, that's usually what we call transitional movements. So usually an athlete will go from a straight line run into a transitional movement and then into another straight line run. So the transitions, or that change of direction movement, and your change of direction explosiveness is really dependent on your hip extensor strength. So all of that's really, really, really critical and important to on-field performance, but it has to be put within the context of the game.
That's really interesting, and it's an interesting point you make there. And one of the points I make to the teams that I work with, and I do some consultancy work more along the lines of psychology and mental skills, but equally sometimes I chip in with the physical side. And psychologically I tell the players that for the most part of the game you're not touching the ball. For about 95% of the game it's about your movement, your awareness, your speed, getting back and forth. And if you sort of broke it down, you're probably looking at, say, a few minutes of the game you've got ball contact. For the rest of the game, it's your movement and your speed and so on and so forth. But in terms of yourself, Ranell, so you work purely on speed. In, say, a team sport, there's other requirements in terms of physical fitness. It's multifactorial. Do you sort of keep one eye on the other areas, or do you sort of just purely focus on speed and then obviously other conditioning coaches work on the other areas? And what do you do, say, in a team environment? If you've got someone playing a team sport, how do you sort of send on the other variables?
It's a really interesting question, because I'm doing a presentation on this weekend at the International Strength and Conditioning Conference up on the Gold Coast. So I'm going to be talking all about aerobic conditioning in field and court-based sports, and how that complements the speed and the explosive training that athletes do. So what happens is that I'll have a lot of athletes come to me in the off-season, and it's because they don't want to lose their fitness, they want to work on their technique and speed, and so I find that I'm programming for that conditioning element of the game as well. And we know from research that basically you need to do a lot of high intensity intermittent running, and then as well as that you need to do a lot of tempo running, so where you're running at about 60 to 75% effort over specific interval distances based on your velocity of running. So we'll base it on the velocity of VO2 of the athlete. So we'll do tempo running, we'll do high intensity intermittent running as well, and then we'll do the speed work. And the reason why the tempo running works so well is that it allows you to put speed work and aerobic conditioning training back to back. So those two elements of training coexist together. Whereas if you're doing something like the max aerobic speed system of training, where you're working at a higher intensity of interval training, whether it be shuttle sprints or a grid or a linear pattern of work, you're working at a higher intensity, so you can't back that up with speed. You need a longer period of recovery. So there's so many different elements that you can do in terms of aerobic conditioning for the sport, but it has to be very contextualized to the distances and the velocities that those players will play in whatever game it is that you're writing the program for. And you have to be able to really meld that with your speed, power, and your absolute acceleration and power work as well. So how you put the programming together throughout the week's really, really important. But as I said, some really nice, strong increases in velocity of VO2 is critical to performance in that aerobic sector or aerobic energy system for athletes.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that obviously we've got a lot of listeners out there who participate in sport as well, some professionally, some semi-professionally, but equally some recreationally. And I think one thing for sure, the complexity of building speed is for me, it's not necessarily a complex process, but for the general person who, for example, they might be a recreational athlete and they're working and they might be like a professional athlete, they really want to focus on the actual exercise themselves. And I think that it's really important to have someone, I think, to sort of take care of that, because obviously there's a lot of science is updating as well, and things are changing, new methods are coming in, and obviously yourself, you're at the forefront of that, you sort of keep up to date, you're always sort of proactive and moving forward. But from a recreational point of view, people might think, well, recreationally, you play for fun. But I'm a big believer in, if you play sport, you play to win, irrespective of whether you play. You're playing badminton with the kids, or whatever it is.
I'm right there with you.
I mean, it's one of them really. I think it's about winning, isn't it? And recreational. If it's a Sunday morning, you get up and play, soccer or football. It's about winning. I think it feels better when you win. We all play to win. Otherwise, we'd do something different. But do you?
And I think sometimes winning is really your objective. So what is it that you're trying to really achieve in that game? So you might go in a game and you haven't been able to last the 60 or 90 minutes just because you run out of gas. Do you know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
So your idea of winning that week might be, oh my God, I got to the final whistle and I still felt good. So that's a win for them.
Absolutely.
Whereas
Absolutely.
for you and me, it might be,
giving your best, absolutely, and leaving nothing in the tank. And there's a great feeling for me knowing you've given it all you've got. And people might say, from a recreational point of view, why would you spend time? But the point being is, it's a great feeling. Sport is, for me, more than recreational. It's a social thing. It brings people together. It's great to be there, even for that sort of duration, to be there. And do you get like recreational athletes who come along and say, we want to, we might not be or aspire to be a pro or semi-pro, but I just want to sort of dedicate myself to being the best I can be, even if it's recreational, tag rugby, or if it's sort of recreational cricket or whatever, and they're just looking to get a bit quicker. A cricket player might want to get quicker between the wickets. It might be, a rugby player recreationally just wants to sort of like, play to the best of their ability. Do you get recreational people who come along and want to improve?
Sometimes in the academy we will. I wouldn't say that I personally get to work with those kind of athletes because my schedule's usually full with the other athletes, but what we'll do is that we have a team of coaches that work with us as well, and so my coaches will most definitely look after anyone that wants to learn about speed or get better in their game. And the other thing too is that we, on our website, which is academyofsportspeed.com, we actually have so many free training drills for explosive speed, so anyone can go onto the website and have a look at what we're doing with our semi-pro and professional athletes and do the same drills that they're doing.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's amazing. I think that's a big thing. And one of the things I find that works really well with some of especially the semi-pro teams, what I think is really useful is to get an idea of where they are in terms of speed compared to the pro athletes. I mean, do you guys do fitness testing too, speed testing as well? Ranell, do you do any speed testing?
Yeah, so the first thing that I'll do is that I'll do a full assessment, and usually at the beginning I'm looking at mechanics. So I'm looking at how the athlete runs, what their restrictions or power blockages are to running, and this is at both sub-maximal, maximal velocity, and also in their change of direction technique as well. So I want to see their skeletal postures and positions, and then see if I need to do any mobility work, any elastic potential or stiffness work, and then when I free up the skeleton to be able to move well, then we'll start putting some real speed technique work into them. And then alongside of that, obviously the basic fitness test, where we'll look at acceleration, transition, and max velocity speeds. That's
really interesting. So prior to doing the actual fitness, the speed test themselves, you'll do the diagnostic sort of work beforehand. That's really fascinating. I can imagine, like, say, for a club, say even a semi-pro club, if you're sort of playing semi-professionally, you think, well, we finished mid-table one season, if we can sort of get our players faster and fitter, even by a few percent next season, then who knows how far we can push up the table, is one way to see it. But what I find really interesting there is that you do that sort of diagnostic before. So, for example, I think what happens sometimes, at least in my experience, I obviously can't speak for everybody, but they go straight to the actual field test without sort of anything else, and you kind of think, well, you're sort of bypassing some opportunities to some quick wins, I would say, to build the speed a little bit more. But in terms of equipment, what sort of equipment do you have to? I mean, you must have some some equipment to be able to do the biomechanics, the testing and that sort of stuff. Do you have anything specific you use yourself to do all that?
Do you know what? I don't use a lot of equipment. So where I'll see some speed coaches film their athletes, break it down, have a look at it frame by frame. I've been watching athletes run for over 30 years, and my eyes are acutely trained to see skeletal positions and postures,